So this discussion will be about searching for jobs, particularly how writing a CV or resume as well as a cover letter reflects some of the same properties that you find in other kinds of writing. And of course it fits into publishing because for many people the end goal of publishing is to find a job. So we'll look at job letters. Some of you will have to add a CV to your grant. So we'll discuss that. This is not a session on finding a job. That's not what I do very well. So we're really going to focus more on some of the issues related to writing. So there are two forms of applications, and the application process is changing a lot, particularly with search engines and websites and online applications. So we're really just, some of them are very similar. How you get the application or CV or resume to the potential employer is changing, but some of the issues are very similar. So there are a difference between a resume, which is usually sent to a business, and a curriculum vitae, which is usually sent to a university. They're read differently. Usually what happens in a business is that the HR department may get all the resumes and then find the ones they think are most suitable and then send them specifically to the individual departments. And curriculum vitae is often read by a committee, and then they narrow down their choices. The one thing to keep in mind that they really want to disqualify you because they usually have a lot more CVs or resumes than for any particular job they can hire. So they're really looking very specifically for ways of disqualifying you. If they're doing electronically, they may have some kind of computer program, and so they look very specifically at your individual characteristics and hope to get rid of you. There are also differences in cover letters. Cover letters to businesses tend to be very short. Cover letters to universities can be a little longer. Again, some of the issues are the same, but how much you draw them out is going to be different. Applying for a job can also include a number of supplemental materials, some of which we'll cover, some we won't, but something like a teaching philosophy, which has to do, particularly in universities where they want to emphasize more teaching, a writing sample where you're in an academic situation, and again, that's where having a published article can be really useful. And a lot of universities are asking for what they call a statement of diversity. So those have to do with how well you're committed to achieving the diverse nature of the university. There are a lot of different places to look for jobs, again, depending on the kind of job you're interested in. Traditionally, the Chronicle of Higher Education and Inside Higher Education were very good for academic jobs. Sites like LinkedIn, as well as there's a large number now of business sites like Glassdoor or Indeed or Monster, which have a lot of business offerings in them. We mentioned earlier that for academic jobs, but for business as well, conferences can be a very good site. Discussion boards are very good for academic jobs. People who are on the board, if they happen to have a job, they know that they're posting to a very specific group. So they're using those sites quite often. Again, we mentioned in the discussion on conferences that those are very useful places to go to look for jobs. Just remember, again, you're always being evaluated, even when you give a paper, but also during the conference itself. So you need to learn. Trendy is probably not the best word, but what's the most relevant issues in your field that you can discuss on, and you have an opportunity to meet potential job offers and network with people. That's something a number of you have discussed in your grant applications. One of the factors that's very similar with what we've been discussing the whole semester is the need to analyze job ads, and in this case for looking for what your audience is looking for. Generally speaking, looking for a job is like finding a spouse or a partner. You have to match up with them. And so you want to look at whether you're matching up with the company. Once you make your application, they're going to look to see whether they match up with you. So if you're, for example, looking at an academic job, you want to look at the requirements. Are you interested in a teaching position, a research position, or a mix of both? And you kind of can tell, even if they don't say it specifically, by how many courses. They usually tell you how many courses per semester you'll have to teach. For example, if it says 4 courses, that means it's predominantly teaching job. If it says 1 or 2 courses, that means you have release time for doing research and then publishing. And again, of course, when it comes to tenure is never totally clear, but those kinds of jobs obviously will demand a higher degree of publication. So that's one thing to consider. You want to look at the nature of the university or the corporation, where it's located, what are its mission, see how comfortable you feel with it. Do you want to work in a graduate level university or an undergraduate university? So there are a number of areas. And you have to think of the limitations of the job. I mean, is it going to be too much work? For example, again, if it's 4 courses, you're not going to have much time to do research and publish. And you have to decide whether you want to do that and if that's kind of the career. One of the difficulties in finding a job at the university level, for example, is that sometimes you get stuck, particularly when you're coming out of graduate school. You may be competing with people who've already graduated, and therefore they've had a little more time to get started in their careers, but it's sometimes difficult to go from a lower level university to a higher level one, because you may not have the time for publishing that they're expecting. So you have to be very careful about the kind of job, particularly when you graduate, and how that job meets up with your goals. So this is an example of a job ad from a company called Scott's Miracle-Gro. I was actually looking at this for my daughter. It's near where we live. It's an internship. She's still an undergraduate. But I wanted to point out how they try to argue that this is a really good place to work. And what you do as a reader and a potential applicant is to look at what their mission statement is, or their culture statement here, and shape your writing to fit that, just as you would with any other forms of writing, and particularly what we were discussing with grants and conference presentations. So in the second sentence, it says, our culture is constantly energized by new and exciting growth opportunities at a rapid pace. So again, if you wanted to apply for this job, you would have to be able to respond to the need to look for new growth opportunities. Every associate plays an important role in providing innovative solutions for today's gardeners and growers, and contributing new ideas to improve operations. So they're looking for someone who is innovative, who has come up with possible solutions to problems, and is willing to contribute new ideas. So that kind of gives you a little bit of sense there of the kind of person they're looking for, and that when you write your job application, this is the kind of person you want to sound like. So often the employers will specify exactly what they're looking for in an employee. And in this case, for example, it says to be enrolled in accredited colleges, possess strong analytical and textual leadership skills, demonstrate strong written and verbal communication, prioritize collaboration and problem solving, manage multiple tasks, and have prior intern experience, preferred but not required. And that's actually an important consideration. This is going to be, again, the case in all kinds of jobs. And what you need to respond to, and we'll talk about this later, is particularly in your CV and in your cover letter, that you possess all of these things. Okay, so if it asks for analytical and leadership skills, you use the word analyze and lead. And if it says written and communicative verbal skills, you demonstrate that you've been able to interact with people, collaborate. Again, collaboration is a verb, collaborate and problem solve. And so those are verbs that you would need to use in your resume or CV. Then in this job ad, it goes into more detail about the kind of requirements and things you'll need to do in the job. And again, what you want to do is you're obviously not going to be able to do all of them, but you want to be able to show that you've already had experience with as many as possible. There are other things you might want to, what you're going to bring to the job, and you might want to look at that's what you're trying to look for in a job to help you grow in some areas where you might be weaker. And in the areas where you have experience, you want to make sure you emphasize those areas of experience. And again, the way you do this particularly in a cover letter, is through your choice of verbs. So if it says diagnose technical problems, you want to diagnose technical problems. If you want to work closely with cross-functional teams, then you show that you have collaborated with cross-functional teams. So it kind of gives you an outline which you feel free to copy. Because particularly in areas where they're using computers to sort people out, it's important that the computer be able to pick up on those terms. Some of you are working with machine learning and you know exactly how that works. So again, there's usually two parts to the application process. A cover letter is the traditional way of doing it. It may change depending on the job and the kind of platform they're using to apply. I know some of the platforms so in some of the platforms they're using now, again, they may not have a cover letter. Sometimes it looks like a grant application platform where you write boxes of information and then the computer actually puts the boxes together into something that assembles a cover letter, but it's very similar. The goals are often very similar. So in the cover letter, or in whatever you're writing outside of your CV, again, the purpose is to respond to the goals of the job, elaborate on key issues in your CV. Don't just repeat what is boilerplate. So you don't want to repeat what's in the CV, but you want to expand on it. As we'll say later, it's like telling a story about yourself. So you need to differentiate the cover letter from the CV so they don't look alike. You can discuss the background of the job or your own background, what you bring to the job, but you have to be careful about over promoting yourself. The purpose of the cover letter is primarily to establish a relationship, and again, it has to be balanced. So some of it depends a lot on your personality, how aggressive you are. Particularly at the end of the letter, there's usually a paragraph where you try to make some personal connection in terms of following up. Again, if you're aggressive, you can say, I'll call you next week to see how things are going. If you're not as aggressive, you'll say you may wait to hear from them, or you hope to hear from them, and thank them. In the beginning of the letter, just to mention, you should put what the job is that you're applying for, because again, you don't know how many other jobs they're sending out. So you have to be specific and say, this is the job I applied for, this is where I found the job, just to make sure it differentiates it and it's sent to the right person. As I said, the difference between a curriculum vitae and the resume is that the vitae can be longer and more developed. Both of them emphasize the key areas of education, teaching, and research. Again, in a university, there's a growing emphasis on undergraduate teaching, which you may be asked to do. So if you have any experience as a GTA, you want to emphasize that. Make sure you have your key achievements as a grad student, what awards you won, what grants you won, what you've accomplished, who's your advisor, those kinds of things. In terms of organizing the CV, you always use bullet points and it's verbs. Try to stay away from sentences that begin with nouns. It's not standard English. It's I did this, I did this, I did this, did this, did this, did this, did this. So you're constantly looking for verb forms in the bullet points. You can list separately your technical skills and sometimes your community service. Don't have too high unrealistic expectations about what this is going to accomplish. I would say nothing, but you could avoid anything about religion, marriage, and family. Technically, it's illegal in the United States to ask about these things, but if you bring them up, they can follow through on them. So you may want to hesitate, and this is a complicated issue. I don't want to resolve it, but you may be hesitant in mentioning, for example, any service or teaching or job you had that would give away your religious or cultural background. So there are lots of places on the internet where you can find examples. I think Microsoft Word even has templates that you can use. So I won't go into some of the specific organization of a CV or resume, but just in general, the beginning at the top, it usually says curriculum vitae with your name, or a resume with your name, and then your address, email, and phone number, which is just to establish a way to get in touch with you. And there is some redundancy between the letter and the CV because you're not sure who's going to read what. So if they may also in your cover letter, they may also ask you for the same information. But the important thing is to make sure they have contact for you. Once you give your background, your contact information, I usually put the first part of the CV or resume as a summary of what you've done. It's a little like an abstract, but it's written, again, in this kind of form of writing where it's all verbs. So this is hard to see, but again, it shows have taught. So rather than say I have taught, you just would say have taught. And you can keep this shorter. The idea behind a summary, much like an abstract, is that, again, you're not sure how much people are going to read. So this may be the only thing some people read. And so I think you want to make this sound good and appealing. So remember, a CV is much longer than a resume. And so a CV may have a lot more topics than a resume does. And the key thing here is that you organize the topics in descending order from how important you think they are. So right now, for many of you, your education might be the most important thing. That is, you have more education than teaching experience. And again, remember, some jobs do not want people who haven't finished their dissertations yet. So if you finish your dissertation, make sure that's clear on the in this part. So if your education is probably the most important feature that you have to offer, then you put education first, then teaching. In this case, this was for a job for teacher training, and then books, publications. Again, these are in descending order of importance. Now, if you're looking for a job outside the university, things like publications may not be as important, or certainly peer reviews, down there, selected presentations. They're not going to be as important. And so once you get a couple pages, that's probably enough. The one thing in common there's usually some line at the bottom that says references available upon request. Nowadays, there's less emphasis on going out and getting the references unless they ask them you for them. There's all kinds of legal issues around references, so both potential employers are sometimes even nervous about requesting them. Again, I want to emphasize that the CV in particular uses these verb forms, and that's one of the most important things. So things like, and this again from mine, designed and taught, coordinated, provided, developed. Those kinds of words were in the job application letter. So in the in the CV, that's what I put down as important. The cover letter is more of a standard narrative story kind of form, but so it's written in standard English. So again, you use the cover letter to tell a story about yourself. What are you bringing to the company, and what do you hope to get? What do you hope the company is going to give to you? How do you match what the company wants, and what are you going to provide for the company? Show knowledge of the company. In both of these, it's very important that they don't sound like they could be sent to any company. So make sure you kind of identify, particularly in the cover letter, that you're talking about their company. It has to sound like they're your primary focus, even if you're sending out dozens of these letters. Each letter has to sound unique. Again, at the beginning, acknowledge where you're applying, where you found the job ad, and then at the end, you talk about your future steps. And again, particularly the ending will depend a lot on your personality and how aggressive you want to be. So again, good luck on your job hunting when you get out of the university. And remember, the one thing, again, you're going to have to learn is to face rejection, because lots of people are applying for jobs. You're going to get a lot of rejection letters, and you just have to learn to move on and be organized in terms of alternatives. Don't get your hopes up for any particular job. Be open to whatever comes along. But at the same time, you need to make decisions about what kind of job you're looking for. Thank you.